Maria, a young Filipina call center agent, and Richard Hayes, a powerful Canadian billionaire, should never have crossed paths. Yet their secret affair in Dubai would set off a chain of events filled with betrayal, jealousy, and unanswered questions. When Maria suddenly vanished, her disappearance exposed the dangerous intersection of wealth and vulnerability, love and obsession. What began as a forbidden romance quickly spiraled into one of Dubai's most chilling unsolved mysteries. Maria was 27 years old when her life in Dubai seemed to settle into a pattern that felt both stable and suffocating. She worked the night shift at a call center, spending endless hours on the phone with customers from around the world. Her days blurred into each other, the dimly lit office cubicles, the cold hum of air conditioners, and the monotone voices that filled the room. To most, she appeared like every other worker in the city, quiet, diligent, and focused on sending money back home to her family in the Philippines. Her small apartment was shared with 3 other women who were also Filipinas. They cooked simple meals together, laughed when they could, and worried about rent when salaries arrived late. Maria often kept to herself, writing in a small notebook when others went to sleep. She wrote about her dreams of one day escaping the constant grind, of seeing a world beyond cramped apartments and 12-hour shifts. On weekends, when she had a few hours of freedom, she would dress carefully and walk through Dubai's glittering malls, blending in with tourists and wealthy residents. She admired the luxury she could not afford, always imagining what it would feel like to belong to that other world. Her colleagues thought of her as shy, but there was a quiet determination in the way she carried herself. Beneath her modest lifestyle, Maria harbored a secret longing. She wanted more than survival. She wanted to be chosen, to be seen. And soon, in ways she could not have predicted, someone would notice her. That attention would change everything, drawing her into a life of wealth, secrecy, and danger from which there would be no return. Richard Hayes was a man who seemed untouchable. A Canadian billionaire with investments in real estate, technology, and luxury resorts, he was admired by business leaders in Dubai and treated with quiet reverence in every room he entered. To the public, he was a symbol of success, a man who had built an empire through hard work and vision. But behind the carefully crafted image, Richard lived a life filled with secrets. He had been married for over 20 years to Catherine, a woman who held her place in high society with elegance and composure. Their marriage, however, was more about appearances than love. Richard's name often appeared in glossy magazines, his face captured at charity galas and high-profile events. Few knew about the long nights when he slipped away from the spotlight, looking for something that money and power could not buy. He found himself in places far removed from the marble floors of his penthouse, quiet bars, dim corners of hotels, places where no one expected to see him. It was in one of these hidden spaces where he first noticed Maria. She was sitting alone, her tired eyes reflecting the exhaustion of long shifts, yet her presence caught his attention. Unlike the polished women of his social circle, she was unassuming, almost invisible in a city obsessed with wealth and glamour. For Richard, that invisibility was intoxicating. She was someone who knew nothing of his empire, someone who treated him not as a billionaire, but simply as a man. What began as curiosity soon grew into an obsession. Richard saw in Maria an escape from his carefully managed life. He had no idea that his pursuit of her would unravel the very world he had spent decades building. Maria had never imagined she would be drawn into the life of someone as powerful as Richard Hayes. At first, she could not believe his interest was real. She was used to being overlooked, blending into the background of the city, working nights, and moving through life quietly. But Richard's attention was persistent. He sent flowers to her apartment, expensive perfumes she hesitated to open, and invitations to private dinners in places she had only seen in magazines. For the first time, Maria felt she was being seen as someone important, someone worth more than her long hours at the call center. Their meetings were always in secrecy. Richard insisted on quiet, hidden restaurants and hotel suites where no one could recognize him. For Maria, every encounter felt like stepping into a dream. He spoke of taking her to Canada, of helping her build a new life away from the crowded apartment and endless work. These promises filled the pages of her private notebook, where she recorded every gift, every whispered vow. and every hope that her life was finally about to change. But the affair carried risks that Maria only partly understood. Richard reminded her often that their relationship could never be made public. He had a wife, a reputation, and a fortune tied to his image. Still, Maria chose to believe in his words, convincing herself that he would eventually keep his promises. The deeper she fell, the more she ignored the unease that crept into her thoughts. Love and luxury blinded her to the shadows forming around them. What felt like the beginning of freedom was in truth the first step into a dangerous trap, one from which escape would prove impossible. As the months passed, the brightness of Maria's new life began to dim under the weight of Richard's demands. At first, his gifts and promises made her feel cherished, but slowly his generosity transformed into control. He began dictating where she could go, who she could spend time with, and even how often she could see her friends. Simple outings to malls or dinners with coworkers started to draw his suspicion. Maria brushed it off as jealousy, telling herself it was proof of his love, but deep down, she sensed a growing darkness in his behavior. Richard, meanwhile, faced mounting pressure at home. His wife, Catherine, long accustomed to his busy schedule and unexplained absences, had started to pay closer attention. She noticed the late-night phone calls, the sudden withdrawals from their joint accounts, and the faint trace of perfume on his clothes. While Richard tried to maintain his polished image in public, Catherine's quiet investigations began pulling at the threads of his carefully hidden secret. Maria remained unaware of how closely she was being watched. What she considered a private escape was no longer invisible. The diary she guarded so carefully contained details of their plans, trips abroad, conversations about marriage, even the hope of starting a family one day. Those pages were her greatest treasure, but they were also a dangerous weapon in the wrong hands. The fragile walls around their affair were beginning to crack. Every day carried the risk of exposure, every secret meeting another chance to be discovered. For Maria, the dream of a new life was still alive, but the danger circling her was far greater than she realized, and the countdown to disaster had already begun. Maria's disappearance began with something small, a missed shift at the call center. At first, her coworkers assumed she had overslept or fallen ill, but as the hours stretched on with no message, concern grew. Maria was known for her punctuality, for showing up even when she was tired or unwell. When she failed to appear the following day, her roommates began to panic. Her bed was untouched, her phone switched off, and the small notebook she never let out of her sight was missing. The absence quickly drew the attention of Dubai police, who questioned her colleagues and checked her apartment. Flyers with her photograph were handed out in the neighborhoods where she was known to spend time. The Filipino community rallied, organizing searches and sharing her story online. Despite the efforts, no solid lead emerged. Maria seemed to have vanished overnight, leaving behind no trail that could be followed. Rumors began to swirl. Some whispered that she had run away with a wealthy man, while others feared she had been lured into something dangerous. Her family in the Philippines, desperate for answers, pleaded with authorities to do more. Days stretched into weeks, and the silence became heavier. Behind the scenes, Richard watched the search unfold with a mixture of fear and calculation. Every public poster, every news mention of her name, threatened to drag him into the spotlight he could not afford. For him, Maria's disappearance was more than a mystery. It was a ticking bomb that could destroy everything he had built. For those who loved her, it was a haunting void, a question without an answer, and the first sign that her secret life had carried consequences too heavy to bear. Catherine Hayes had lived in her husband's shadow for more than 2 decades. She had tolerated his late nights, his unexplained trips, and his cold distance. But when Maria entered the picture, something changed. Catherine was no longer dealing with a faceless distraction. She was dealing with a real threat, a woman young enough to be her daughter and bold enough to imagine replacing her. When Catherine found Maria's diary tucked inside a handbag Richard had hidden, the truth hit her with crushing force. The pages revealed everything: the secret meetings, the expensive gifts, and the promises of a new life together. The betrayal cut deeper than she expected. Richard's affair was not a passing indulgence. It was an escape plan. The words in Maria's handwriting described a future that erased Catherine entirely. It was not just her marriage at stake. It was her position in society, her wealth, and her identity. For a woman who had sacrificed so much to maintain appearances, the thought of being discarded filled her with rage. Catherine understood that confronting Richard would lead to scandal. Divorce would drag her name through headlines and strip away the influence she had carefully protected. But Maria was different. Maria was vulnerable, far from home, with no power to fight back. Catherine's anger turned into strategy. When Maria disappeared, Catherine remained silent. She watched as the city searched, as Richard denied, and as rumors spread. The missing woman became nothing more than a shadow in the desert, her voice erased before it could threaten the family's empire. Catherine's hand remained invisible, but her presence lingered in every unanswered question, in every trace of fear that followed Richard. For Catherine, it was not just revenge, it was survival. When investigators finally questioned Richard Hayes, his answers were polished and confident, as though he had rehearsed them for years. He described Maria as nothing more than a casual acquaintance, someone he had briefly met in passing but never truly knew. His status in the city shielded him. The authorities hesitated to push too hard against a man whose wealth and influence touched so many corners of Dubai's economy. With no concrete evidence, Richard walked away from questioning untarnished, while Maria's case remained stalled in silence. Yet outside the official reports, whispers refused to fade. Employees at Richard's company spoke quietly of seeing Maria near his private penthouse, arriving late at night and leaving before dawn. Hotel staff remembered a young woman who matched her description, escorted into suites booked under false names. Even neighbors had noticed unfamiliar footsteps and muffled arguments echoing through the hallways. The rumors spread like smoke, hard to capture but impossible to contain. Richard countered with appearances of control. He attended charity events with Catherine by his side, smiling for cameras as if nothing in his life had changed. Every photograph of them together was a carefully staged performance meant to erase suspicion. But behind the scenes, unease grew. The more he denied, the more people began to believe that something sinister lay hidden beneath his polished exterior. For the public, Maria's disappearance became a tragic mystery. For Richard, it became a shadow that followed him everywhere, threatening to unravel his carefully built empire. His denials could not erase the whispers, and the unanswered questions surrounding the missing call center agent would forever stain his reputation, no matter how hard he tried to bury the truth. Months after Maria's disappearance, the search seemed to fade into silence. Her case slipped from headlines, her face slowly disappearing from posters that had once been plastered across the city. Then, a shocking discovery brought her name back into the spotlight. Construction workers renovating an abandoned villa on the outskirts of Dubai unearthed a buried suitcase. Inside were Maria's belongings, clothes, a pair of shoes, her identification papers, and the diary she guarded so fiercely. But her body was missing. The suitcase only deepened the mystery. Investigators combed the area, searching for remains, but the desert gave up no further clues. The discovery raised questions that had no answers. Who placed the suitcase there? Why was her diary left intact, its pages filled with dreams and plans for a life she would never live? The find was a chilling reminder that Maria's story had not ended. It had simply been silenced. For Richard, the suitcase was a dangerous piece of evidence, linking him once again to the woman he had tried to erase from his life. For Catherine, it was a confirmation that her rival was gone, her threat neutralized. Yet neither of them faced consequences. With no body, no witnesses, and no proof, the case remained unsolved. Maria's family, thousands of miles away, received the suitcase with trembling hands. It was all they had left of her, a painful symbol of both her hope and her tragedy. To this day, Maria's fate is unknown. Was she silenced by jealousy, betrayed by power, or swallowed by secrets too large to escape? The truth remains buried in the desert sands, leaving her story one of Dubai's darkest and most haunting mysteries.